The prairie has a way of holding silence, stretching it out across the horizon until it feels heavier than the sky itself. That was the silence I first noticed when I rode into Hollow Creek, my horse's hooves striking the dirt road like hesitant knocks at a stranger's door. Folks whispered that the sheriff's death had left a scar on this town, but it wasn't the kind you could see. It lingered in the air, in the way eyes turned away too quickly, in the hollow space beside the widow's porch. Her name was Clara Whitfield, the sheriff's widow. A woman everyone pitied, yet no one dared to approach. She carried her grief the way some people carry a rifle, close to her chest, ready to fire at anyone foolish enough to cross her threshold. Yet when the county judge summoned me, a ranch hand with no family name worth remembering, and declared that I was bound by law and circumstance to marry her, I felt the world tilt. Forced to wed a woman who looked at me not with affection, but with the cold endurance of someone swallowing poison, was not the life I imagined. Still, here I was, standing on the edge of her land, hat in hand, wondering which of us despised this arrangement more. Clara was no frail widow. Her presence was sharp, like the wind that cuts across the open fields at dusk. Tall, dark-haired, with eyes the color of storm water, she held herself as if every glance were a challenge. The town admired her strength, but behind that strength I saw shadows. The kind that don't come from grief alone. The conflict between us was clear from the first exchange. "You don't have to pretend this is something you wanted," she said, voice steady, gaze locked on mine. "And you don't have to pretend I'm the man you'd ever choose," I replied. There was no anger in our words, only resignation. Two strangers bound by duty, stepping into a union neither of us believed in. But beneath the bitterness lay something unspoken, questions neither of us dared to voice aloud. Why had the judge insisted? What debts, secrets, or quiet bargains had pushed us into this forced alliance? The prairie may have been silent, but within that silence pulsed a truth we hadn't yet uncovered. Clara wasn't just the sheriff's widow, she was the keeper of something the town wasn't ready to name. And I, the reluctant husband, had just been thrown into the heart of it. That night, as the wind rattled the shutters of her lonely house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just stepped into a marriage. I had stepped into a story already burning, one where every choice would draw me closer to a fire I didn't yet understand. The first days in Clara's house felt like living inside a locked chest. Airless, heavy, every word between us measured like coins we couldn't afford to waste. We shared a roof but not a table, a bed but not a night's peace. She moved around me as if I were a shadow she refused to acknowledge, and I, too proud, too stubborn, let the silence grow. Still, there were moments I couldn't ignore. In the evenings, when she stood by the window overlooking the prairie, the lamplight caught the curve of her profile. There was a softness there, fleeting, almost fragile, before she caught me looking and turned away, shoulders squared as if bracing for battle. It was during one of those evenings that I found the first crack in her armor. A letter lay open on the table, half hidden beneath a stack of unpaid bills. I shouldn't have glanced at it, but her sudden steps made me freeze. She caught me standing there, eyes flicking from me to the paper. "You read it?" Her voice was sharp, more fear than anger. "No," I said quickly. "But I saw enough to know someone's been writing you." Her lips pressed into a line, and for the first time, I saw something flicker in her gaze. Panic, maybe guilt. She snatched the letter, folded it tight, and tucked it into her apron. "Don't ask questions that don't concern you," she whispered. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind scrape against the house, wondering who had written to her. A family member? A friend? Or someone the sheriff had left behind? Someone who knew a truth that might explain why she looked at me with such guarded eyes? The town, too, began to feed the unease. Men at the saloon fell silent when I walked in. Women offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. It wasn't just pity for Clara that lingered in their stares, it was suspicion, as if I had stepped into a role meant for someone else. And then came the moment I couldn't shake. Riding back from the fields one afternoon, I saw Clara near the old barn, clutching that same letter. She wasn't reading it, she was tearing it into pieces, scattering them like ashes across the dirt. When she noticed me, her expression hardened, but not before I caught sight of her tears. "We all bury things we don't want found," she said coldly, brushing past me toward the house. The words stayed with me. They weren't just about the letter. They were about her, the sheriff, and the secrets that bound us tighter than the vows we'd been forced to speak. For the first time, I realized this marriage wasn't just about survival or reputation. It was about uncovering truths the Prairie had tried to keep silent. And whatever those truths were, Clara was determined to face them alone. But fate, cruel, persistent fate, had placed me at her side. The days grew heavier, like storm clouds pressing low against the prairie sky. Clara spoke less, but her silence wasn't emptiness, it was full of things she wouldn't say. I began to notice the small betrayals of her composure. The way her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching, the way she lingered by the barn as if expecting someone to emerge. It was there, in that barn, where the truth first began to show itself. I had gone looking for tools, but instead I found a locked trunk shoved into the corner. The wood was worn, the edges scarred as though it had traveled more miles than I ever had. I was about to turn away when I saw Clara standing in the doorway. "Leave it," she said flatly, her voice carrying more command than plea. I stepped back, studying her. "What's in there?" Her jaw tightened. "Memories. Nothing that belongs to you." The words cut, but what stung more was the flicker of fear in her eyes. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the way she looked, like someone guarding a wound too deep to be touched. That night the air between us shifted. She poured herself a glass of whiskey, sat opposite me at the table, and spoke with a bitterness that had been fermenting for too long. "You think you've been trapped in a life you never chose," she said. "But tell me what's worse. To be forced into it, or to choose it and realize too late it was a lie." Her voice cracked just slightly, but it was enough. My chest tightened. Whoever had written those letters, whoever's memory lived inside that locked trunk, he was still with her. Maybe it was the sheriff himself, or maybe it was someone else entirely. But either way, I was living with a ghost. The town's whispers only fed the fire. I overheard men at the saloon speak in low tones about how the sheriff hadn't died cleanly, how debts and betrayals had trailed him like dust. When they noticed me listening, they shut their mouths, but the damage was done. Clara's grief wasn't just for a husband lost. It was tangled in shame and secrets too dangerous to name. One evening, as the sun bled out across the prairie, Clara stood on the porch, arms folded tight. "You don't belong here," she said softly, almost to herself. "This life will burn you if you let it." I stepped closer, the distance between us charged like dry grass before a flame. "Then let it burn us both," I murmured. For the first time, her defenses faltered. Her lips parted, her eyes shone with a mixture of anger and longing, and in that fragile space between us, I realized the truth. Whatever secret she carried, it wasn't just hers anymore. I was part of it now. And soon, whether she wanted it or not, it would come to light. It happened on a night when the sky itself seemed restless, clouds dragging shadows across the prairie like unsettled spirits. Clara and I hadn't spoken since the moment on the porch, but the silence between us had changed. It was no longer cold, it was charged, waiting to break. I found her in the barn again, standing over the locked trunk. This time she didn't turn me away. Her shoulders sagged, her hands trembling as she pressed the key into the lock. With a soft click, the lid opened and the smell of old paper and dust spilled into the air. Inside lay a bundle of letters, carefully tied with a faded ribbon. Clara lifted them out, her eyes glistening. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "They weren't written by the sheriff," she whispered. "They were written to him. From her." I frowned. Her? Clara finally met my eyes. A woman he loved before me. A woman he never let go of, not even after he put this ring on my finger. The words hit me like a gunshot. All this time, I had thought Clara was haunted by her husband's death. But no, she was haunted by his betrayal. Her voice broke as she continued. "I knew even when he came home late, even when he smelled of perfume that wasn't mine. I stayed silent because silence was safer. Safer for me, safer for the town, safer for the lie we lived. But now," she clutched the letters to her chest, shaking. "Now you're bound to me, and you deserve to know what kind of legacy you've been forced into." I reached for her hand, steadying it. "Clara, you think this shame is yours to carry, but it isn't. His choices don't define you." For a long moment we stood there, the barn creaking with the wind. Then she dropped the letters into the fire pit beside us. The flames licked greedily at the paper, curling each secret into smoke until nothing but ashes remained. Watching the fire, Clara let out a sound that was neither laugh nor sob, but something caught between. I pulled her close, and for the first time she didn't resist. Her forehead rested against my chest, and in that quiet surrender, I felt the walls between us collapse. The kiss that followed wasn't born of passion alone, it was born of release. Of grief shared, of wounds laid bare, of a truth finally spoken. It was tender, trembling, and yet it burned brighter than the prairie fire we both feared. When we finally pulled apart, Clara whispered, "You should hate me for keeping it from you." I shook my head. "No. I hate him for not seeing what he had. But you? You're the only honest thing in this place." The prairie outside stretched silent and endless, but for once the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt alive, as though the land itself had been waiting for this moment. We didn't know what the future held, whether the town would ever stop whispering, whether love could grow from something forced. But standing there, holding her as the fire died down, I knew one thing with certainty. The story we were writing now was ours alone. And that, perhaps, was enough.